All right, here we go. What another nice afternoon. Folks, we're going to be starting in just a few moments. Yes, Gian says the audio is good. And so we're going to begin on how about that? That is amazing. Yesterday, UMass, where boy, that set off panic yesterday, and now they're saying that they believe it was just a juvenile that had, yeah, the audio was good on X, that had an airsoft gun. So I don't know, if that was designed to be a prank or I don't. That's different. That is definitely different. All right, we are 5 minutes out. 5 minutes out, and we're going to speak with Stephanie coming up. Yes. We'll start off with that one. Let me just check our Facebook family. Uh, yes, we will be out later, obviously, right? Hmm. Okay. And we are live. We are live. Yes, we are. Go. There she is. Folks, I was supposed to do Newsmax today, but because of the Kennedy hearing, we got bumped, which is totally understandable. I mean, I live in that world, so I know what it's like. I've had to bump people. Just happens that way. So then they just bump it to next week, which is totally fine. Simply because I know the drill. All right, we're going to be starting in just a moment. I want to thank Angelo again for our last night. If you saw our live, he is just fantastic. And those tomatoes are incredible. I plan on having the wine sometime this weekend. Okay. And then there's that. Okay. Two minutes out. 2 minutes out. Okay. Okay. And we will begin momentarily. Folks, again, incredible stretch of weather we're enjoying right now. There's Lynn Miller. There's Heather. Yep. There's Donna. Boy, quite the hearing on the Hill with Bobby Kennedy. Excuse me, Bobby Kennedy. And then a little bit later, talk a little bit of Governor McKee's trying to get a face-to-face meeting with the White House. As you heard Dan McGowan talk about, I'm not convinced that's going to happen, but that is, in fact, the road that he seems to want to go down. All right, and we're going to be starting in just a moment. We're going to start off with this. Boy, I don't know what to make of. We're just finding out it was a youth walking along with the airsoft gun. So that caused the panic at UMass. All right, folks, we're going to begin at 106. Yes, good afternoon. Right now, as we speak, we're live on AM 1380, 99.9 FM. Now, you can always listen to the program at our website, which is depetro.com. And then right now, many of you are watching on whether it's Facebook or YouTube or X. And this portion of the program, before we bring her on, I want to remind you, each week, actually, I deal with people that because they see me out covering a crime or a crime scene or something like that, and they ask me, what do you know about this? Or what do you think? And I always tell them the same thing. Listen, I'm not an attorney. I just play one on both television and the radio, but you could talk to a real one if you contact Marin, Barrett, and Murphy, criminal defense attorneys, 50 years combined Rhode Island criminal defense experience. Whoever that youth was yesterday with the soft gun walking around the UMass campus, I believe that person could use an attorney right now. Call them, and maybe you need an attorney. Maybe you just need some legal advice. But call them 401 228 8271. Marin, Barrett, and Murphy. Instead of asking your brother-in-law, instead of asking the person that sits next to you at work, instead of asking your next door neighbor, why not? Let's call a real attorney and explain what your situation is right now. 401 228 8271. Well, let's bring her on. Folks, from Marin, Barrett, and Murphy is our legal expert. It is attorney Stephanie Murphy. Stephanie, good afternoon. I want to start off with this case out of Texas where you have some youth. They think they're just playing a prank, ding dong ditch. And there's some different facets to this because I've seen reporting that part of the trend on TikTok is that they actually kick the door. But anyhow, so they do it. It's late at night, and the homeowner comes out, seemingly chasing them, fires, and takes the life of the 11-year-old, and now is, in fact, being charged. I want to hear your thoughts on this case.
Well, that's such a sad story that this happened and everything like that. But in terms of, self-defense, having weapons in your own house, there are rules of when you can use them, how you can use them, and at what point in altercation that you can use it. It seems like this individual is getting charged because it wasn't in his house. The intruder wasn't inside. He didn't need it for self-defense. The right to use deadly force is a right that you have in some situations, but not many. And this seems to be a situation where the kids were fleeing outside of the property and he continued to pursue them.
Now, what would be a scenario? Because other states, specifically Florida, Texas, definitely have a whatever, stand your ground, protect your castle, and so forth. Where did this individual go wrong? Would it be, in fact, if these individuals had gone inside the house, or was it just because someone steps on your property doesn't give you the right to use this type of lethal force?
Yeah, someone stepping on your property does not necessarily give you the right to use that sort of force. If they're coming in, weapons drawn, banging down the door, trying to open windows and stuff like that, that changes.
We had that situation in Cranston it was actually some time ago now, where you had an individual, Gene Quiddy. I think he's still at the ACI, but his neighbor, Jim Pagano, was a Cranston firefighter, and there was a dispute, and this individual, he swore, I covered the trial, that Pagano had swore he was upset that Gene Quiddy had swore at his kids because the tennis ball went on his lawn, or a ball they were playing. And when Pagano went up to the house and the door, he struck Gene Quiddy, and then Gene Quiddy took out, I think it was a handgun, and he shot and killed his neighbor. He seemed to feel that he was on safe legal ground simply because his neighbor had come, into his home and had struck him.
Yeah, that's definitely, a set of circumstances that you have to perceive it from the person who, house is getting intruded in, the person's coming at. In that case, it does seem different. The person was coming into the house, assaulted this person. But whether or not that gives rise to, to use deadly force, it's up to the state law, it's up to the circumstances, and up to how that person's feeling and a reasonable person.
Stephanie, what about, just on one more question on this, if you're the defense attorney, what if in fact it's 11 o'clock at night, and what if in fact that the previous night someone had done it at the house, or maybe there had been a home invasion in the neighborhood, or maybe someone had in fact kicked the door open? What is some of the defenses that this suspect that's been charged, where they at least could try to play out in court to say that he had reason to be fearful that this could have been an intruder coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. If I was his defense attorney, I would find out a lot more about my client, find out, if he suffers from any, disorders, PTSD, what his experience in the past has been, if he was on high alert, why was he on high alert, what was going on in the neighborhood, interactions with different neighbors, is he a person that feels scared in his neighborhood, that doesn't go outside alone at night because he's worried about crime or worried about, something going on in the neighborhood. So I think all those things are really important to get from your client. And as a defense attorney, that's my primary goal, is to advocate for my client and to explain their individual circumstance. Because one person's individual circumstance could be a lot different from someone else's. And I really think that needs to get developed and brought out to the prosecutor's attention, and also in mitigation too. So if you were to admit to a crime in court, a lot goes into sentencing, a lot goes into mitigation of what was going on. They want to make sure that, you're not going to do this again. And there's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't happen again if the circumstances were different.
And just finally on this, you tell me, but where this individual seems to be somewhat more challenging legally is the fact that he chased, the individual out, and then, supposedly shot him in the back. It seemingly would be far different if this altercation had happened. And I'm just, it's just saying maybe what if they had actually kicked the door in, or some of these kids had gone into the house. But the challenge legally for him and his team seemed to be he had left the house and then was chasing the individual. Now, in regards to some of these so-called pranks, we also saw over the weekend, there was a swatting incident in Warwick. And as I was mentioning at UMass yesterday, there was panic over someone, walking with, now it turns out it was an airsoft gun. What type of defense is there for someone? Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's see. I'm sure she'll pop right back. Folks, it happens sometimes. We have a little bit of a technical glitch. We'll get her right back on. But I think some of these, I'd be very curious to see how this individual is going to be, how the defense is going to come up with something, because a lot of times how these stories start out and then where they end up can be a little bit different. As we were saying, if you find video and it was a group and they were maybe pretty aggressive, I know a lot of people would say, imagine that, we've talked about this, just a young kid and a teen prank and something like Oh, wow. Okay. Um, okay. It can happen sometimes. It can happen again. There we go. Okay. I think we have her. There we go. All right. There we go. You're
Sorry about
back.
that, John.
Stephanie, just quite all right. Just finish up on this this case where people seem to have maybe either a misunderstanding or they whatever, but it doesn't give you the right. Even if someone said, "Hey, they were trespassing and it was 11 o'clock at night," it doesn't give you the right to use deadly force, let alone you're outside the property.
I agree with that. I think this case is a big uphill battle for the legal defense, whether or not, there's mitigating circumstances to maybe lessen the charge or get a lesser sentence. But from the facts I'm hearing, the case that, the person, that the teenager was shot in the back as he was kind of fleeing the property. The guy came after him. So those are all kind of really damaging facts for a defense attorney, but it's something that the facts are the facts, and a good defense attorney will be able to take those facts, hopefully add some helpful information, some mitigation, and hopefully can, advocate for their client strongly.
Now, what about over the course of the weekend? There was this swatting incident in Warwick. And again, someone may say, oh, it's just some kids playing a prank. But it was a 911 call and, it brought a tremendous response. What about the defense, a legal defense of someone of, we were just playing a prank.
I mean, playing a prank is one thing, using, vital resources of a state and a community for a hoax, that's a whole different thing. The impact that a small prank can have on someone else's life, emergency services and stuff like that, it's a huge ordeal. And a lot of times I think people think it's a little joke or a hoax, but there's severe legal consequences to anything like that, especially utilizing all the services that were utilized in this prank.
Now, this case of this individual in Massachusetts, murder suspect accused of dumping body at Mass Hospital. Apparently, some individuals they were using illicit drugs. Something happens. What? Again, I'll just play. The suspect says, "Hey, listen, I didn't know exactly what happened, but I did the right thing by bringing them to the hospital." How would you have advised this individual?
Well, I think people, bring somebody to the hospital because they don't want to incriminate themselves with drug usage, but they want to make sure that this person gets care and stuff like that. From what I'm hearing about this story, is it was a little bit more than that with some other players involved. I also think the person was duct taped. I think I saw somewhere. So I think the most important thing is that the safety of everybody is the first consideration. You can deal with legal consequences of maybe possession of drugs, selling of drugs, delivery of drugs, causing death. But the most important thing is if you get someone help right away, that's by far the most important thing. So somebody called me in this situation, I say, hey, call the police, call the ambulance, get them the help they need, and then I can help them deal with the ramifications of any actions or legal actions that may be taken against them. But it, it's better to bring them to somebody to hospital than not do anything for them. I just don't think in this case, maybe it was done soon enough or under the right circumstances.
And let's play that out. Some people it's a Friday, Saturday night, whatever. They're doing some drugs. Someone passes out, wakes up, and one of the people that they were doing the drugs with seemingly is dead. What should they do as their attorney? What should they do in that moment?
I would call me. Call an attorney immediately right away. Whether or not 911 is called or the body's discovered, however that plays out, we could definitely walk you through the steps. But the most important thing is to get legal advice, to make sure that you don't do anything to incriminate yourself, but you also offer help to the victim, or if the victim, needs transportation to the hospital, that's the most important thing. If the person survives, then the legal charges, will be very small. If they pass away, that's a whole different story. And there's a lot of different legal charges that you could get charged with. So get the person help however you can, and then call an attorney and ask for their advice.
So there's no legal consequences necessarily if some people are doing doing drugs and someone goes unconscious, whatever. If you call 911, at least that could be a step in the right direction.
And it goes to mitigation too. The trouble that people get charged with is, selling drugs to somebody and they overdose and stuff like that. There's a lot of different things, but I think the main priority of anybody, police, the court, is to get the help for the person who needs help. And then the legal consequences are the legal consequences. But you call somebody, you call for help for somebody that you're in the room, they get the help, they survive. That's a heck of a lot better than, the other alternative of not calling for help.
Now, this other story, 6 arrests made during a ride out in Pawtucket and Providence. What about someone that says, hey, listen, I legally bought that vehicle. The police have no right to arrest me and confiscate me. This seemingly we're seeing less of this than we did at one time. But what about those that are in fact arrested during something like this?
Well, I think it's good to point out that some people are getting charged with criminal crimes, not just traffic offenses and stuff like that. They're going to court, they're getting charged with crimes. So there's ways to own property, there's ways to, respect the law, and there's ways to utilize your property, such as, driving correctly, having registered vehicles, driving where permitted, not being a public safety hazard, not blocking roads, not causing, chaos on the roads. So I think when it crosses a line from, quiet enjoyment of, a right that you're entitled to causing problems in a city with police, and everything like that. I think that's where it crosses a line, and that's where people are getting charged criminally. It's not just traffic offenses.
Now, because of social media, we see this more often. But for instance, Attleboro police seek help identifying person in connection with shoplifting incidents. Whenever this happens, sometimes I'll hear from a family member, whatever. What should someone do if suddenly they see Warwick police are looking for information about this person, Cranston police are looking for this person? A lot of times, some people, their reaction seems to be, I'm not going to leave the house for the next 2 weeks. But what should someone do? Put yourself in their shoes if, in fact, suddenly they see the police are looking for them for an incident, that happened at a store.
I would say to call your attorney or us immediately. What we can do, instead of having a manhunt out there where you get picked up on a Friday night, could possibly get held until Monday, we'll arrange a time for you to turn yourself in. If you're not on probation or not on bail, chances are that you'll get released and we can help ensure that release that night. And at least you're not living in the fear of when are the police going to find me? Are other people going to report me? Everything like that. I think it would be much better in this situation if this individual just called the police with his attorney, turn himself in instead of the police posting these pictures and videos, all over the place.
Because Stephanie, if anything, a lot of the shoplifting stuff, I mean, it depending on what it is, but it's not a major crime, but there definitely
No,
law
it's not,
enforcement is
right?
right.
Right,
Yeah.
you get bail on it, even for multiple offenses, and this was something I was going to talk about later in the show when you asked me about my segment, is in terms of shoplifting and stuff like that, a first offense or under $1,500 is a misdemeanor charge. You're going to get PR bail, as long as you're not on probation or bail, you're going to get released. And there's a lot of really good ways to work out a shoplifting charge. If the store is able to get back the items, maybe some community service, maybe a counseling session to see kind of, what's going on, an apology letter. But there's very easy ways to work out a very favorable outcome. With shoplifting charges, though, like subsequent offenses can be felonies or if it's over $1,500. So that becomes a little bit more serious. But at the same time, it's nothing you're going to get held on. It's something that, unfortunately, there's a lot of people charged with it. And it's just much better to turn yourself in before all the social media and the pictures and it blows up.
Yeah, there's a woman, I think in Pawtucket, her nephew has not left the basement, since July because I'm not even sure what it's involved in, but that's
I
not
mean,
exactly the way to handle it.
yeah, they need to call an attorney. The attorney will talk to the police, find out what the charges are, find out what a recommendation for bail would be. There's a lot of different ways that an attorney can help you feel more comfortable, even about a scary thing about turning yourself in. But we can definitely get some answers for you ahead of time, figure out the charges, figure out, what the best thing to do. Sometimes, clients call me up and they go, I'm having a really difficult time. I have some substance abuse issues. I have a warrant out for me. I'll call the police department, say they're going to inpatient treatment and see what we can do after they complete it. But there's a lot of different things that are out there and people get scared and sometimes don't make the right choices. But
Mhm.
definitely give us a call and we can help.
Folks, it's time for Murphy's Law. This is a story that Stephanie has found. What do you have for us this week, Stephanie Murphy?
So I was just going to bring up the fact that I don't think many people know about kind of subsequent offenses. So, like I was just saying about shoplifting, if you have one shoplifting, that's a misdemeanor. But once you get subsequent offenses, it does raise the stakes to a felony. And kind of where I get a lot of questions about are on domestics. So, a third domestic in Rhode Island is a felony, and it does carry a year to serve, minimum mandatory year to serve. So I just think it's really important when people know about domestics, it's not just a 5-year look back, it's any domestics on your record. So let's say you had domestics back, 10, 15 years ago, you had two of them, you resolved them, but now all of a sudden you have an arrest warrant out for a different domestic. You can definitely get charged with a third domestic. It's a felony and requires a 1 year. So I just mentioned that because a lot of people will call our office and be like, oh, it's just my first domestic in 5 years. And I just think it's good for people to know that domestics and other sort of crimes, sometimes even if you have ones from years ago, if they haven't been expunged and taken off your record, you can be treated as a third or subsequent offender, and the stakes
Mm,
become a lot higher.
wow. Folks, again, always better to call and find out. Stephanie, excellent job as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Sean.
All right, folks, there it is. Attorney Stephanie Murphy right here on the John DePietro Show. Now, this portion of our program is brought to you by PR Landscape Materials and Garden Center. Remember, right now, what a fantastic selection of homegrown summer corn is available. Also, fresh peaches, vegetables. They're open 7 days a week. 3688 Quaker Lane in North Kingstown for PR Landscape Materials and Garden Center. They grind it, family run business, and they are open 7 days a week. Stop in and see them. Now, check out DePietro.com. We do have the video up of the shooting on Felix Street. Now, that case we're definitely watching, only because it's my information that tells me that was an AK that was used to shoot up that truck on Labor Day afternoon. Check it out, all the video on DePietro.com, brought to you by the Coesit Inn, 226 Coesit Avenue, West Warwick. Remember what we say, lunch, dinner, drinks in the lounge. They're waiting for you at the Coesit Inn. I want to once again thank Angelo if you were watching last night. We terrific. The guy is just great. We may start to do that more often where I stop and visit someone when we're out at night. The concept, I enjoyed one of his delicious tomatoes that he sent. And also for those, especially our subscribers, Carol, again, the services for Carol's husband is going to be tomorrow. Now, I mentioned that UMass, apparently, I thought it was actually, excuse me, a hoax. But it turns out that, and I did post this, that apparently it was just some youth. I don't to me, I don't understand in this day and age. It was a youth with an airsoft gun who just decided to walk on the campus. So for those of you that are watching yesterday or just followed any of the coverage, incredible. A juvenile male has been identified. This is from the Lowell Police Department. Brandishing a firearm yesterday prompted a large police response. That's an understatement. I mean, they had the FBI on the campus. The firearm, confirmed to be an airsoft replica, has been recovered. 2:30 in the afternoon. This was yesterday. Lowell Police Department received a report of an individual possibly with a firearm. Police responded, began to search the area. They did aircraft system. They did drone, canines, Massachusetts State Police, SWAT, UMass Lowell Police, FBI, ATF, all responded. Detectives assigned to the CIB, Criminal Investigation Bureau, initiated a comprehensive investigation while patrol officers secured the area throughout the night. Safety of the city, blah, blah, blah. With the reported firearm, in this case, ultimately determined to be an airsoft gun. So, but if you see the photo, I thought it was actually potentially a hoax, just because the way, I didn't think, it was just odd. Whoever filmed the person walking with the airsoft gun, the way that they stopped filming, So, but I want to talk about also, folks, this situation with Governor McKee and President Trump. Now, we talked about it with Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe, and now Attorney General Peter Nerona, they're filing a lawsuit where they want to take legal action. And this all has to do with those of you that if you ever followed any of the rallies that the president would have, they were always even joking about windmills and some of the limitations of them. But I'll tell you another great source of energy is propane. That's right, propane, residential or commercial, heating or cooling. Propane is also, it is affordable, it is sustainable, it's equitable, lowest carbon fuel, it's renewable, and it's good for the environment. Is propane. And remember, Propane Plus, online at propaneplus.com. You can call them at 401 885 4209 or in Massachusetts, 508 252 3359. They're available 24/7. It's Propane Plus. Well, folks, the situation it was apparently Governor McKee announced it on Channel 12 that he wants demanding a meeting in the Oval Office with President Trump about this offshore wind. And as I have said, like everyone else, if that was actually workable, if that was actually a source, a reliable, efficient source of energy, then like everyone else, I would be in favor of it. It was, in fact, as Dan McGowan mentioned on the Globe, I remember I was interviewing then Governor Don Kachiri, whether it was 08, 09, 010, somewhere in, or 2010, somewhere in there where he was talking about, well, we're exploring offshore wind, and basically the way the currents hit Rhode Island could almost be as they called it at the time, Saudi Arabia of wind. You remember the America's Cup, Ted Turner, Dennis Conner, they used to be off the Rhode Island coast. But I don't believe Governor Kachiri had this plan that would all have to be unionized. And the only way that someone could come in and do this is you have to hand over your workforce to organized labor. And that's what you do. When you allow the AFL-CIO, organized labor, and all these unions to come in, you're basically handing over your workforce. Look at someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who came up with Facebook. He knows the type of workers he wants. He knows what's important. How many billions is Meta now worth? He's not in the business of saying to the AFL-CIO and Sabatoni and these others, okay, I came up with it, now you're going to run my workforce. Successful companies don't work that way. So, in Rhode Island, whether it was Raimondo or Chafee or Mckee, but it suddenly became the only way you can do business is you have to bring in and use all these union workers. And what happens when you do that? Your costs go up. So what also should be highlighted, Governor McKee wants a meeting with President Trump. Well, where's our Washington delegation? Where's our Washington delegation? How come Senator Sheldon Whitehouse isn't saying, I'm going to get a meeting at the White House? Because when they had their big press conference about this offshore wind, it was filled with insults at the president, whether it was White House or Gabe Amo or Seth Magaziner. I was glad to hear Dan McGowan mention that a lot of people dismiss the importance of having some representation in Washington. Where's our Washington delegation? It should be very notable that they're useless in this situation. Even at the press conference they had to talk about the offshore wind had been paused. Seth Magaziner, White House, Amo, Senator Reid tries to kind of, well, even Senator Reid criticizes, but not to the degree that White House, Magaziner. If you're the Trump White House, why would you be sitting down with the governor of Rhode Island when our Washington delegation is nothing but insults? I think it speaks volumes that you don't hear Senator Sheldon Whitehouse saying, I'm going to get a White House meeting. He's a senator. It's Congressman Magaziner. I'm going to secure a white, nothing, zero. Don't you understand? These people are useless to us. Seth Magaziner, they should call it the Langevin Act. He's touting that he's part of a bipartisan agreement to ban stock trading against members of Congress. You know who made a fortune off of supposedly stock trading was former Congressman Langevin, who now has his little fiefdom at Rhode Island College, him and his brother. You mean to tell me you don't think they were trading on insider information? Congressman Jim Langevin, went to Washington with maybe less than $1 million and suddenly now has multi-million of money. His trades, there was an article several years ago, there was the trades on Langevin. His stocks were returning 45% returns. Notice no coverage of that in our local media, all insider trading. But in getting back to Governor Mckee, he's not doing this for you. He's not demanding a meeting because it's the most of. He's demanding a meeting because of organized labor, because he needs them to go to work for him, because of all these jobs. And where I really think they're going to strike out is as someone that watched the Trump rallies 2024 during the re-election, President Trump, the whole element of wind power, it's the most expensive form of energy. And it was essentially, it was a punchline during the Trump rallies. So Rhode Island Governor Dan Mckee, I want a meeting with Trump in the, yeah, good luck. I want a meeting. I demand a meeting. Who, him and Matos? Do you understand this game? If this is such an efficient form of energy, why does it have to get all this? Why does it have to get all this taxpayer money? Why does the state have to fuel all this? Why does the federal government have to fuel all this money if it's such an efficient? It's not. What Mckee is basically saying to the Trump administration is, we need you to fund this scheme that we have going. But they want to ignore the fact. Where's our Washington delegation? How come Magaziner's not saying he's going to set up a meeting? How come Sheldon Whitehouse? Folks, next year is such a pivotal year in the elections for the state. By the way, the same goes for Massachusetts. Governor Healy was saying, I stopped 2 pipelines. Well, stop complaining about the high cost of energy. I mean, the energy costs, they are ridiculous. But the scam that they have, it's a scheme where they get union jobs, supposedly 1,000 union workers, and you have to have them as part of the equation. That's the only way that they'd get the deal to do business in Rhode Island. What if a company came and said, we don't need organized labor. I don't need Sabatoni. I don't need Pat Crowley. I don't need Rachel Miller, the head of the Providence City Council. We're going to train our workers. We're going to pay them well. We're going to give them benefits. We don't need them running our workforce. What would be unreasonable about that? We're going to follow all laws, but we're not going to have these union officials running our company. But no. In Rhode Island, oh no, you got to hand over the workforce to them. Does that make any sense? Remember, Bill Parcells said, "Hey, if I'm going to do the cooking, at least let me shop for the groceries." Do you see why a lot of people would then not want to come and do business? Why should they have to hand over all their workers? Notice they try this with YouTube. And YouTube says, no, we're not going to have you take over our workforce. They tried with Elon Musk. They tried with all these companies, and they fail. But in Rhode Island, it became, oh no, you have to use them. You have to use you got to hand over the workforce to Pat Crowley. You got to hand over the workforce to, can you imagine Rachel Miller? Rachel Miller, who wants to defund the police. She has to handle your training. Why does she have to handle the training? Why does she have to handle the hiring? What does she know? I wouldn't put these people in charge of a 2-car funeral. Oh no, you're going to hire them. Why? What do you mean? These are all payoffs. And Sheldon Whitehouse had the nerve to stand up. This is corruption. Corruption. Corruption is forcing these offshore wind companies to honor the deals that you make with organized labor. Folks, this portion of the program is brought to you by Kids Club. Lisa contacted me and said, who is it that you recommended for childcare? Lisa, it's Kids Club on the Pike. Contact them because, yes, they do perfect for birthday party venue, but also before and after school care. They provide transportation for school-age children ages 5 through 12. They do preschool, half and full day program, preschool children 3 through 5. Kids Club on the Pike. I share their social media. They're located right on Plainfield Pike on the Cranston-Johnston line. It's Kids Club on the Pike. Call them 401 443 5336, 401 443 5336 for Kids Club on the Pike. They do a fantastic job. So, folks, this business, Mckee right now is really, to me, it's all political. And he suddenly, I want a meeting. And I know Doug Burgum, who's of energy. They're not going to put, I don't think, here's Governor Mckee, I don't think Trump knows. First of all, stop with the last name. Show a little respect, Governor McGreed. How about that? Why don't we start with that before you start, making demands? Why don't we? What do you say we just start with some basic respect? And you could refer and say, I'm looking to try to have a meeting with President Trump, right? Like this crowd, they're so beyond showing any element of civility. But this is what they, the whole thing of you made the bed, now lie in it. And I think it speaks volumes that what's the point of having representatives in Washington who can't get a meeting with the president, how come they can't rally and get some of the Republican senators on board? They can't do that. It's because it's all tough talk with this crowd. So, but this isn't about, it's an effective form, an efficient form of energy. What Governor McGreed is basically saying is we want the scam to continue. And we need the offshore wind to continue because I made these promises to these union leaders. And Governor McKee is basically saying the only way I'm going to get reelected is if I get this back. But that's, this is the ultimate, this whole thing of Governor McKee, we have a problem. No, you have a problem. You have a problem. And the same thing with Governor Healy. I've stopped 2 pipelines. Well, maybe you shouldn't stop the pipeline. As someone that has followed and watched at this point, after everything President Trump has said, where you lose power, they're stopping that foolishness. Energy is a big part of doing business, and a cost-efficient way of providing energy is really the key. I mentioned a friend of mine, a restaurant owner, electricity bill, $8,000 for the month of July. This is, in Mckee, well, the thing is, we need the government money, and then, that way, here's what Governor McKee is basically saying. We need to give the unions the money so then they will help me in my reelection bid. But that's not a reason. That's not a reason to have this stuff offshore. As I've talked about, this whole thing to me, it is a scam where Governor McKee and the unions basically came up with this. And then that way we're going to lean into it. And, this is going to be the source of energy. That's what it comes down to. So, Governor McKee, is there anyone that really thinks he's going to get a White House meeting? It's the reason why they're not supporting it. As Seth Magaziner and Sheldon Whitehouse throwing insults at the Trump administration, the reason they're not doing it's the most costly form of energy, and it's ruining our wildlife. Bobby Kennedy, who by the way was having a tough time on the Hill today, but he talked about it at a cabinet meeting, and the fact that you don't want all this stuff out there. You don't want all of these things falling in that could hurt shellfishing. And I'll have them on again. We had the organization that talked about the damage it's doing. I mean, we're a big part of the industry of this area is tourism and also seafood. And you're destroying it with this stuff. And it's all because he and Matos made promises to organize labor in order to get elected. Why would President Trump sit down with him? So why? He can look like a hero? So Sheldon Whitehouse can look like a hero? So Seth Magaziner can look like a hero? So Gabe Amo, the most useless? There's no one more useless than that guy. Why would he do that? Here's the real answer. They're not going to do that. Folks, this portion of the program is brought to you by Arch Design Builders. Well, listen, summer is over, and maybe you've been thinking of redoing your kitchen, or maybe a bathroom or a basement. Arch Design Builders. They specialize in residential design. Call and set up that free consultation, 401-207-4124. 401-207-4124. Arch Design Builders. Whether it's a kitchen, if you're thinking of redoing your kitchen or a bathroom, or maybe you have an unfinished basement, or maybe a special project, a deck, or you want to add on an extra wing or room to your home, Arch Design Builders. High-end custom build customer service. Call Ed and Roxanne and schedule that free consultation, 401-218-9707 for Arch Design Builders. Now, folks, again, what people have to come to grips with is the policies that we've talked about, the policies of Governor McGreed and his administration. They're not winning policies. Crime is down in the city of Providence. I believe what really should be an issue are the schools. The schools, to me, that really should be an issue. Massachusetts, to their credit, because of the population, all the universities, Massachusetts has what's considered some of the finest schools in the country. Rhode Island is far behind that. But this guy right there, he's looking for 4 more years. I'm telling you, that is not the way to go. He does not have any type of plan. He's demanding a meeting with President Trump. Why would President Trump meet with him? What do they bring to the table? Well, you have to do it. First of all, it's not even 80% completed. They exaggerate how much electricity it would be. But again, it comes back to, if this is such an efficient form of energy, why does it have to have all these government subsidies? The experts that we had last week on about this that talked about, you still have to have your electric grid. So it's really, you have to have the backup to the wind. So it's almost 2 forms. So the media can go along. Oh, Governor McKee's demanding a meeting with President Trump. Right now, with President Trump, everything he's involved in, does this seem like he's going to sit down with Mckee and Matos? That's right. We want a meeting with Trump. It's what you're looking at, and I have his picture up on the screen. He's the one with the problem. He is. And it's a form of money laundering. He gets them federal money, and then they kick in and they give him campaign contributions and no-show jobs. What I was laughing at, Rachel Miller, the head of the Providence City Council, she's in charge of the workplace development. Why does she have to be in charge of that for all these wind companies? Oh, well, because she's the head of the Providence City Council. Yeah, that's a form of corruption right there. Folks, this portion of our program is brought to you by Quality Asphalt Seal Coating. This over the next few weeks and months, this is the time. Why not have them epoxy your garage or patio? Decorative concrete flooring. Call Corey, free consultation, 401 283 9815. 401 283 9815 for Quality Asphalt Seal Coating. They can also resurface a tennis court or a basketball court or a pickleball court, sport court. Quality Asphalt Seal Coating, 401 283 9815. Call Corey, set up that free consultation with Quality Asphalt and its seal coating. Well, folks, again, good afternoon. You can see, as I've said, you can see the states that are thriving right now. And right now, Rhode Island and Massachusetts we have a problem with who the Washington delegations are and also who the governors are. Rhode Island Governor Dan Mckee, I don't know. Supposedly, Helena Foulkes is going to announce. It's past Labor Day. We still haven't heard of a Republican. But Rhode Island Governor Dan Mckee, he's going to demand a meeting. Boy, first of all, part of me, I wish not only that it would happen with the president, but I wish it could be televised. Maybe they could ask him why he gives out driver's licenses to illegals. Maybe they could ask him why there's an FBI investigation into the Washington Bridge. Maybe they could ask him why he runs a pay-to-play administration. In order to do anything with this guy, everything is pay-to-play. And some of the people he hires and has in place for his fundraising, Shahazian and some of the other ones. Folks, it's total Clownville. I don't think they realize it. No, I think they realize and they see exactly what it is. And it's a scheme. It's a scheme of the laborers make out, the unions make out. This is also a foreign company. And they're saying, hey, fine, we don't care. We don't care if it runs up the cost. As long as we're getting your money, it makes no difference at all if you jack up the cost. Let them do an investigation into the no-show jobs. Let them do an investigation into how much they steal during these training exercises. So there is so much behind the curtain here. And like I've said, Rhode Island, Mass, Connecticut, we should have. There are the states that have energy, very cost efficient, thrive. It's an easier place to do business. It's a better place to do business. But if there's some way to use some of this offshore wind, if there's a company that's set up and said, we want to operate this and it's not going to cost anyone any money, and then we're going to use this as a different way for people as a source of energy, then I don't have, that's totally fine. But to try to argue that this is the most efficient way, there's much more efficient ways of doing it. But you see, the problem with Magritte and the rest of them is they turned it into where, as you have Sabatoni and the rest of them complaining, it's 1,000 jobs. It's so much money that comes in, and then they just fuel it back to all these individuals. I don't think whether it's Mckee or White House or Magazine, they're not arguing that they want to do this because it makes sense and it's a good source of energy. To me, the reason they're arguing this is they have to, is because they told organized labor they would do that. And that's who's really calling the shots on this whole thing. Folks, this portion of our program is brought to you by Watson Materials. Remember, the largest selection of landscape materials in Rhode Island. Call Sean at Watson and request a quote. 401 885 0600. 401 885 0600. Watson Materials, especially this time of year. We enjoy being outside so much in the nice months. Why not? So many people, there's so many options now. People have complete outdoor living spaces. Watson Materials, they have landscape lighting, they have pavers, they have retaining walls, natural stone, cobblestone, decorative stone. Watson Materials. Call Sean 401 885 0600 and request a quote. It's Watson Materials. So, what you see right now to me is Governor Mckee really struggling. What is he supposed to do? Is he really, what he's, announcing that he's demanding a meeting with President Trump? Is he doing that for our benefit, or is he doing it because the laborers are saying, you need to do everything possible? If you can't make this happen, then we're going to throw our support to someone else. See, this is the problem when the decisions being made by this administration, the Mckee administration, they're not doing what's in the best interest of you. They're not doing what's in the best interest of the taxpayers, of the population. Everything is political survival. Everything is who can help me get reelected. And at this point, that I come back to that press conference that they had of Sheldon Whitehouse and Seth Magaziner and Gabe Amo. And I've played it. They're lobbing bomb after bomb at the administration. Where's the Washington delegation? Why does the governor have to try to get a meeting? Why isn't Senator Sheldon Whitehouse setting up the meeting? Why isn't Seth Magaziner setting up the meeting? This is one of the problems when right now, as I've also stated, we have no representation in Washington. None. Both Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and actually Connecticut. These three states. Who right now would say that the three states, Rhode Island, Mass, and Connecticut, are thriving? Let's just focus on Rhode Island for a moment. When's the last big job announcement of a company relocating? A company is going to be hiring more workers. So-and-so is moving here and it's going to be 500 jobs. You don't hear anything like that. All he does, Governor Mckee, he adds people to the state workforce, and their idea of employment is trying to get people more state jobs, or now with this offshore wind scam fiasco. And it is a fiasco because the Trump administration, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think they're going to budge on this. I don't think so. And Mckee just thinks, I just don't think they have all the information. I think his problem is they do have all the information. And anyone that has been following this administration would know, like I said, it was a punchline at the rallies all last spring, all during last summer, and even during the fall. Trump would joke about the couple saying, oh, look, dear, our light bulb went out because the windmill's not spinning. You think he's going to open up the floodgates and give all of these members of organized labor? How about Sabatoni, the big labor leader, gets up and the first words out of his mouth are insults to the administration? Are they under the impression that stuff doesn't get back? Are they under the impression that no one is seeing that or watching that? Or Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who wages a war against the Supreme Court, against all of the judges, against the Trump White House? Or Seth Magaziner, it's one insult after another? Hey, this is the golden rule. Whoever has the gold rules. This is a time for people to wake up. Now, folks, if you're listening to the radio, stay tuned for the 2 o'clock news. Everyone else, subscribers anyway, we'll see you out there later on tonight for Road Patrol Live. Enjoy this Thursday.